the subject of the class today, which I think is it's a theme that we could talk about for a while, and I would like to talk about for a while, is really centered around the book of Yov, which deals with the question of good and evil in the world, or when bad things happen to good people. But before we go to the book of Yov, I want to present a question to you. I want you to think of uh, situations in your life where you felt that this question looms larger. When were the situations where you felt that this is really something that bothers you more? I mean, there are times that we don't think about that. Think about incidents that in your life that you heard on the news that affected the world in the past. What are the moments that we think of and we say, this should not have happened? This evil is not right. Why is God doing that? Why is God doing this to the world? So think about it for a while, and then I want to present categories and tell me if they cover the things that we were thinking about. And I'm just saying this now. I want to dedicate also the shiur to the Elui Neshama of a very dear friend, Vivian Batsera, Sharon Waba. We just had the memorial service during the Shiva for her.
Rabbi, can we dedicate to one more person that she just buried today? I just buried her today.
Yeah, and Elui Nishmat.
Fegi Bat Miriam.
Fegi Bat Miriam.
I will.
But I commented when I spoke today that of course there's no situation where one would say this person deserves this person doesn't deserve that, but there are situations where we say this completely doesn't make sense, right? And that was one of those situations. Someone who was such a giving person and caring for others and impacting people positively, always ready to help in whatever she could, raise a wonderful family. And after a battle with cancer for 3 years, passed away at a relatively young age. So thinking about those categories, I marked a couple of, I noted down a couple of categories that I think usually people, these are the times where people raise these questions. So I think that one category that makes us raise this question of good and evil is when something happens on a scale that is incomprehensible. Could be a natural disaster, or a terrorist attack, or war, or what is happening now that is affecting people, even if we, for some people, to compare the fatality rates from the corona to other diseases, they would say this is not as bad as other pandemics, but the impact that it has on the world is something that led a lot of people to ask, okay, what is God doing here? Where is God's hands? Why doesn't he help the scientists fight a cure or a vaccine, right? So I think that, or another example, there's a tsunami that hit Southeastern Asia, and obviously the Holocaust, things like that, at such a scale, civil wars. I think this is where we ask the question, why is this happening? Another category is that of something that happens randomly, and that some of the things I mentioned before also could fall under this category. A random victim. When we think of a war, for example, where people are targeted, a certain population, a certain nation, or a disease that plagues certain swath of the population. That's one thing. Okay, we understand why it affects them and not others. But something like I mentioned before, or an earthquake, or the um, or the tsunami and stuff like that, the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers that took the lives of people that otherwise are totally unrelated to each other. Um, why is that happening? Uh, there's there's the category of course, things that happen to us, right? Whenever something happened to us, we feel that, and I think also when things happen to people who are to whom we feel some type of kinship. For example, when God forbid, there's a plane crash, and people want to know how many Israelis were on the plane, how many Americans were on the plane, like what is your identity, right? How many Italian, Canadian, etc. Each one wants to know. Someone like me, someone that I. So is it just this morbid need to know details about people in my vicinity? Why is that happening? Um, and then I think the other category is when something is the magnitude of the evil is not uh, in the scope in terms of numbers, but in terms of the uh, intensity. So, for example, when there's child abuse, or the innocent suffer, there's this Israel mentioned in the text, but was going to mention that I think that especially when evil strikes the innocent and the helpless, there's nobody there who could stand up for them. So those are the five categories that I was thinking of. The Something that happens on a great scale, something that happens randomly, something that happens to us or to people like us, or something that happens to people who are so innocent and helpless, either young babies, kids who are being abused. You mentioned the human trafficking. People are being kidnapped and sold into slavery, and nobody's there to watch for them. Um, think about the examples that you thought of. Do they fall into these categories, or there's something else that I didn't mention? You think? Do they fit? There are other types, categories of evil in the world that do not fit into those five categories that I mentioned. It could be. I'm not. I didn't map out everything. I'm just thinking. I'm thinking out loud, and this obviously part of it is my own personal experience, and also many years as serving as a rabbi, which unfortunately I had to accompany people through many difficult situations and see their reactions, and including my own reactions at a certain point. I think maybe I mentioned it before in one discussion, but there was one year in my life as a pulpit rabbi that several tragedies came one after another in the community, and I was at an age, I was in my 40s, that it threw me into a spin of sort of, you could say, depression, or giving up on the world. Like, what's the point? Was the and it expressed itself in my sermons. There were, I mean, I was trying to find purpose, and my sermons that year were very, very dark. My wife told me at the end of the year, she says, finally, something brighter comes up. She said, you scared all the congregants, into thinking about the meaning of life and their purpose, etc. So everybody's impacted by that. Um, so I don't hear any, but feel welcome. You're welcome if you want to, send it by chat, or if later on something comes up, please let me know if that is the case. So I'll leave these categories aside, and I want to look 1 second at the flip side of the question. It's good when you analyze the question to look at it from both sides. Like, what is the opposite? Like, if I change some factors, just like in a scientific experiment, right? If I change some elements in that equation, what do I get? So let me see this question. Like, why do bad things happen to good people, right? we ask this question. Do we frequently ask, why do good things happen to bad people? Is it at the same magnitude of the bad things to good people? Do we ask that, like, why good things happen to bad people, or not so much?
Well, the Navi always asks that question.
Yeah, the Navi does, right. The Navi mentions that.
Oh,
Right. The Navi'im
But
do.
I think that nobody wants to see that Rasha getting good when the tzaddik gets bad. So
Okay. So if it would be everybody gets good, that's okay. But the injustice of the good people suffering and the bad people not being punished is a also. Let me ask you this question: when we think of why good things happen to bad people, does it bother us more if the bad people are bad in the sense of they're irreligious, they don't follow the mitzvot, or they're bad towards other people like tyrants, murderers, pedophiles, etc.? What bothers you more when you see someone who does evil and prosper? Is that the person who eats pork while driving on Yom Kippur, or the child abuser or molester or something like that?
The latter.
What?
The latter.
The latter. Okay. So
Yes,
it bothers.
yes.
Right. Okay. Towards others. Now, let me ask this question. This flip side: does it bother us do we ever ask the question, why do good things happen to good people? Do we ask, like, why? Like,
I think it's expected.
What?
I think it's expected in some way or another that good things should happen to good people because they're good.
Right.
So Hashem rewards us with the good, even though good things can also happen to bad people because we're not exempt from it. But I think it's something that's acceptable.
Right. So we're asking about the exception, right? When it is expected that good things will happen to good people and bad things will befall bad people. But when good things happen to bad people and vice versa, this is something that is out of the ordinary, right? Not the right order. Okay, so just to clarify the question, we really care. We want there to be a system, in other words, right? It's not just, why am I suffering? We really want to make sure that the system works. So everything that fits into the system is fine, but when we see that there is that system that we were promised, right, or we were told about, where evildoers are punished and good doers are rewarded, it doesn't work. It bothers us. Okay. Last thing. So I spoke about the categories. I spoke about flip side, flipping the question around. Another question now, and that is, when we say, or we ask God, why do bad things happen to good people, right? In a sense, we say, we would like you, God, to intervene and stop evil, right? Is that what we're saying? We would like God to intervene and stop evil from happening, or are we saying something else?
Or God help us intervene to stop it.
Okay, or God
Not
help
God
us
on his own
intervene.
sometimes.
Okay.
It's either or. You could say that God on his own is just going to do it, or he's going to help you accomplish that somehow.
Okay, but
the people
basically, right? But we need some kind of intervention. Mo, I see you. You want to say something, Mo?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
We're working on the assumption here that God is behind reason one, God is behind reason two, God is behind reason three. I have a problem with God micromanaging every single aspect of our life and looking at it that way. And that's another, I guess, another
I agree with
that fits into the
Mo.
equation.
100%. We are talking.
I agree with Mo. We all agree with that.
Yeah, we are talking with that premise that God is a micromanager. Now, if you recall, 2 weeks ago, when we had the poetry night, my daughter read this poem about tears in the fabric, where God sort of like checks his pockets and everything falls out. And someone raised this opposition. Okay, I'll get back to Yoni's comment in a second. Worth reading. And then her husband, who was a rabbi at Kehilat Jeshurun, KJ, in the Upper East Side, in Manhattan, made with her a video on that with that poem. And someone wrote, before they shared it publicly, they sent it to a couple of people from the Minyan, and one person came back very strongly, attacking them for believing in a God who's a micromanager, who does everything tit for tat, and he keeps a tab on someone who follows us in everything we do, right? And he said, you know what, I'm not going to post this video because I don't want any controversy from anyone. I told him that he should, not my book, the book of my life, because I'm always getting into controversies. Now, if someone has a problem, let him bring him up and we'll talk about that. But I told him that I think the appropriate response to that person would be, if you come to shul even once a week and you read the Shema daily or not daily, and in the Shema you say, if you listen to God, I will bring rain and there will be abundance and the crops will be fruitful and successful, etc., etc. And if not, and I will destroy you and drive you from under the heavens. If you don't believe in a God who's a micromanager, why are we saying that? Why are we saying it in the tefillah on a daily basis? Maybe we should also cut out of the Torah the parashiot of Bechukotai and Kitavo. We read the klalot. Right now, we don't cut them out. We read them. There are people who are afraid to come to shul on this Shabbat.
So Rabbi, in our shul, we send up the rabbi for the klalot.
I know. Yeah, I also go up.
And the rabbis get angry. Some of the rabbis get angry. They don't want to go up for that aliyah.
Yeah, I'm not.
They're in charge of it. They're responsible.
It's funny because I think it genuinely, but my wife doesn't want me to take it. She's afraid. But beyond that, half of our tefillah is about this, right? All of our tefillot, everything we say, the tefillot, the liturgies, slihot, Rosh Hashanah, Kippur, Untane Tokef. If you ever read the Untane Tokef in the Ashkenazi tradition, it's all about that. So, on one hand, we say we don't want God who's a micromanager. On the other hand, this is what we say. Another example in the memorial service or the Arayat that I attended today, I was the only non-family member who spoke, but we were very close, and everybody who spoke were children, siblings, but everybody repeated the phrase, no, that this is what God wanted. This is how God wanted it, right? We don't understand now, we'll understand later. Maybe not in this life. And that brings me to Yoni's comment that we are relying on imperfect human intellect, right? So is it really, and this is a very powerful argument that the bad events, good or bad events in our time, in our life, are time bound. But then later on, we see things with greater clarity. The question is, does it always happen? And also, when we think about things that may have been difficult for us, but then proved positive, is it just a coping mechanism, something that we cling to because we have to believe that things are good for us? And also, I would ask the question: Are we really factoring in the residual damage that everybody who's being impacted by what happens to one person? Are we saying that God calculates the shock waves that will be created by what is happening to one person in one place. And so that's the question of micromanaging. But I think that whether we ask God to help us intervene or we ask for intervention, we do want God. We do ask God for things to be a bit different, right? We say, I think that we are all touched by seeing a young child suffering, right? And we say, please God, could you make this child not suffer, right? Why did this have to happen, right? But so my question is, if when we ask God to intervene and to stop evil from happening, where do we draw the line? Like when we look at bad things that are happening, right? Where do we draw the line and tell God, okay, you can intervene up to here, but or up to here, and from this side, no, just leave it alone. Don't intervene. Do we do that? Do we just say, okay, God, please take care of this, but don't touch that? Or if we say we would like God to take care of evil in the world, we wanted to take care of all, to eliminate all evil.
So, Rabbi,
In other words, Ariel?
I think the natural consequences that help a person build character should be left alone. But the blatant evil and corruption and things like that are blatant evil, I hope that Hashem would intervene.
So good point. Shayna, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think I'll go along with that, but I'll up you one in that I think it has to do with how catastrophic the evil is. And that's why it bothers us so much that someone who is young and innocent, a baby, a child, a person who's a very, very good person, when bad things happen to them, it's harder because the injustice is stronger. So I'm very comfortable, I think, at this moment anyway, with the paradigm of the Ramchal and like Derech Hashem, that there's this grand kind of plan that's going on, but we're also responsible and we're causing things to happen in the world. But that breaks down when you get to huge things like the Holocaust, like horrible massacres, terrible child abuse. There's where I want to say, God, if you are really a merciful God, why does so much suffering? Can't you put a cap on it? I know that there's things that's happened to me in my life that I looked at as suffering, and I've become a better person for it, and I've got insights that those are good things, but there's got to be a cap somewhere on that amount of evil in my mind.
So I want to do like sort of like a mental exercise here. And I also look at Susanna's comment in the chat that if we ask God to take care of everything, we eliminate the human agency, our responsibility, which is a very important point that I'm going to get back to, or maybe at the end of discussing Eov, but this is an important point to ponder. So we do, Shana, you mentioned like atrocity, or Ariel mentioned blatant evil. So let's look at the death of a person, a violent death by someone else, right? So we think of the Holocaust, of terrorist attacks, of civil wars. But really, once that is eliminated, let's say God makes all these massacres on a large scale stop. But there are still homicides taking place around the world, murderers. Would we like God to also intervene and stop all these murderers from killing all these innocent people, even though it's only one person at a time?
Well, we can't. That was just the comment in the chat that somebody made.
Right, we can't. So what I'm saying is, okay, and let's say we would have asked God, and God says, you know what? I'm going like Minority Report, prevent all these things from happening before they happen. And then we say, okay, but what about accidents? We want you to prevent all accidents, right? And there are a lot of crazy accidents, not just car accidents, people falling from the third rung of a ladder and dying, or other crazy accidents like that. So I think we enter here a very not dangerous, like it's a subjective region of what we define as blatant evil, or as a large scale evil. where do we stop in? Where do we step in to do something? So, for example, I'll take the Holocaust. I take a natural disaster. When we think about the Holocaust, right? We keep saying, why didn't God intervene to stop something of such magnitude from happening? On the other hand, if you know stories of Holocaust survivors and of partisans and what is called Hasidei Umot HaOlam, the righteous Gentiles who helped save Jews, right? And you see that sometimes the action of one person who refused to succumb to evil, saved dozens and sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of lives, right? You say, what if other people would have done the same, right? And that would minimize the magnitude of that atrocity. And same with natural disasters. There were many natural disasters that could have been avoided if people would have taken the right steps. So I'll leave that question also sort of open because I want to go to the opening of talking about categories of evil. And please feel comfortable to challenge me and to raise a question at any point. It's I'm not lecturing. It's a discussion and an analysis of this what I think is one of the most pressing questions for a believing person, meaning for someone who believes that God exists and God created the world and God installed a system of reward and punishment. This is one of the most, if not the most pressing question. Why is it happening? Why is the system not working? Yoni also added, the evil in the world is allowed by our actions, and we'll get to there, right? We have, the question is, when people say, it's you grow through suffering, right? A lot of people mention that. And actually, I read a book by, I forgot the name of the author. Is a Christian pastor. Is the name of the book is a booklet called "Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People," and he goes with the ideology that this is God's way to educate us, and he brings an analogy of the shepherds in the Alps when they have a goat that is unruly and jumps out of the path, and the goats would all follow that goat. They break its legs. So now it learns to be more in line. And then he brings the story of a young man who, whatever, had a desire for some specific thing and then got very ill and lost the ability to have such desire. And he said, that is God's way to help him do it, right? So if we take, let's say, I know a lot of religious people who say that, say you grow from your suffering, right? And you could also point to many great artists and poets and musicians, usually in the field of art. The people who create amazing, powerful art are those who suffered a lot in their lives. Great poetry is usually about suffering and not about, it could be about the beauty of nature, but it's not as powerful as something which is painful. So with that in mind, would someone be willing to put their children through suffering just to make them grow to be great artists? I want you to be the director of the next blockbuster that I know how there are people going to watch in this situation, right? So I'm going to make you suffer, guilt trip you, and make you cry every day. So some people do it. Yeah, they do it to their children, but not because they want them to be something great. It's just because they're mean parents. Others are disciplinarian and think that that being disciplinarian will make them great children. But I'm talking about to someone who really loves their children, and to do that, to inflict pain upon them, for them to grow, it's hard to see. To put them through challenges, yes. I did it to my child once. I don't think it was major suffering, but my son, who would, when he was 17, was a little bit reckless with spending money and driving the car. Lost his laptop. Several other things happened. Basically left the laptop in an open locker in the school, and it disappeared. Yeah, it's a laptop, right? So I let this one go, but a while later, when he took the car he drove and he came back with a leaking tank, uh, or leaking oil. I told him that he has to pay for it. That's it. I've paid for all your mishaps, but this time you have to pay. Um, and he ran. It hit him. He ran to the bank and pulled out all his savings. They had like $700, $800. He came back with the money and he says, "Here, I'm willing to pay for that. I know it's my fault." And he gave me the money, and I saw it really hurt him, to think that all the money that he saved for a while and after I gave it to me, I gave it back to him. I said, as a matter of fact, I spoke with the workshop, and it said it wasn't your fault, but it's a good thing. I think that incident helped him understand responsibility, but it wasn't. I hope. Maybe I should ask forgiveness. I did ask forgiveness for that, but he thought it was okay. Um, he learned from this experience, but it's not sustained, prolonged suffering. It was just for him a process that he had to go through. So anyway, I want to go back to the first question.
Rabbi, quick comment.
Yes.
Also, like when they say that the desert, that the people were punished and they suffered for 40 years and it was a punishment. It's not really a punishment, because if someone was 20 and he lived till 40, he lived a nice life, and then they taught him, and then the next generation took over and they moved on. It wasn't really a punishment, so to speak. It was a teaching type of experience for them.
Right.
The nation. And people say, "Oh, God punished them and they suffered in the desert." It wasn't suffering, really. They were living, they lived out a nice life. 40 in those days was a very long time. If the guy was 20, well, so to speak. Those numbers, you know what I mean?
Right. So you have to really understand the stories of the Tanakh. What exactly do we have the stories in the Bible teach us about suffering and about necessary, unnecessary suffering? I think the question could be raised more even than about the desert, about the slavery in Egypt.
That's the same type of thing. You have to go through it and feel it to appreciate, you know what I mean? That to treat other people not as slaves and stuff. Have to go through that experience, so to speak.
Also, Rabbi.
I didn't see
Rabbi.
that. I didn't see that.
Rabbi, I was going to say, what about the teaching that that we suffer here in order to not suffer in the afterlife?
Okay, well, I'm going to get to that. I just heard it today, and that was my next question, and then I'm going to circle back to the beginning. And like I said, it's just introduction. This is a very, very, very loaded topic. Like I said, the slavery in Egypt. This is a hefty matter, because God tells Abraham beforehand, you know that your descendants are going to be slaves in the land, in a foreign land, and they're going to be tortured, etc. And the amazing thing is that Abraham doesn't complain. And why is that? Is it because they had to suffer, they had to be punished? I think over there is like something maybe similar to what David is saying. There is a learning, there's a learning curve, a learning process for them. Abraham understood that in order to become the nation that receives the Torah, we have to go through the experience of slavery. And I think that's why the Torah keeps mentioning Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Torah focuses more, if you realize, more than the redemption. The Torah focuses on the memory of the experience of being a slave. I think that with all our shortcomings as a nation, as Am Yisrael, we do have I think a greater sensitivity to the suffering of others. And we know Jews started a lot of social movements, whether they're religious or not. And that's because of the constant hammering of this concept of you were a slave, you know what it means to be deprived of freedom. So there is definitely a certain value in suffering, in hardship that we learn from. But I think that we all understand when we talk about, I think, individuals, and we see what individuals go through, we could it's always, I think others' suffering is, or let's put it this way, our sufferings is usually greater than others. We always, tend to focus more on our own. But I think that we could we're not talking about things on a greater scale. At least when we look at one individual or one case, we could usually judge more or less what is within reason and what is beyond reason for that person to go through. But I want to one more question, and that already sort of goes a little bit out off the limits of the Bible into the rabbinical world, and that is the notion of heaven and hell and life in the afterlife. People like someone Ariel mentioned, people suffering here, so they won't suffer in the world to come. People getting their reward in the world to come, or the wicked being rewarded here, so they won't get anything in the world to come. So this is a question that I pose to observant people, asking this. Now, in Pirkei Avot, the famous Mishnah in the first chapter says, "Al tiyu ka'avadim hamshamshim et harav al menat lekabel pras." Don't live your religious life as servants who serve the master in order to get a reward. In other words, your actions should not be directed at being rewarded, because then, I guess this is what they wanted to say, because then there's no inherent value to what you're doing. It becomes selfish, right? But this Mishnah was said almost 2,000 years ago. So when someone tells you, for example, when your grandparents are coming to visit, you tell the child, grandpa and grandma are going to come to visit. Be very nice to them and don't ask them where they got you any present. And don't worry, they'll give you a present at the end, right? So, the kid will not mention the present, but he'll be very obsequious and dance around his grandparents if that is the only reason why he should love them. So how can we really take it out of our system? And that's really my question. As observant people, I would ask people if they would have known with utmost certainty that nothing happens after we die. There's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no existence for the soul. Would this change anything in the way they live their religious lives? And I'm asking you also, take a second to think about that. Let's say we knew with certainty that all what we're talking about, Olam Haba, Yemot HaMashiach, I'm saying it as a hypothesis, right? Would we continue to live our religious life exactly the way we live them today, or would anything change?
Everything will change.
I would love to answer that.
Okay, so Gabriel, you say everything will change.
There's no if there's a concept of schar and onesh, and there's a concept of making mitzvot, the whole purpose in the Torah, the Chachamim that made commentary on the Torah say, why did Hashem give Nisyonot to Avraham Avinu? And they answered the same thing. He gave the Nisyonot, so everything will be and telling him how to do it, so everything will be a mitzvah. And if everything's going to be a mitzvah, now Hashem has a reason to make schar for Avraham Avinu. If you're saying your hypotheses, then what's the point in having any sort of religion? There'll be complete anarchy.
Okay.
There's no reward, there's no punishment.
But on your personal level,
but Rabbi, also Abraham's life wasn't so easy. He had famine. All the avot, if you look at their lives, wasn't so easy. They had famine all the time. Yaakov had the roughest life of everybody.
They had a very difficult life. We know that.
No, but there was not. It wasn't magic. It wasn't what people think.
Yeah. Mute 1 second because we have echo. So, and I'll get back to you 1 second. Gabriel, on your personal level of observance, you think something would have changed, that you do things less, more?
It's not a fair question to answer because I don't know any other way. I was raised with Yirat Shamayim. I was raised by very religious parents. So this is what I know. But if you're saying that there is no such concept of heaven and hell as, on a spiritual and Jewish level, then we're wasting our time doing everything that we do. And if that concept, even for the Umot HaOlam, there's no reason to have any kind of fear. It's going to be complete hedonism and anarchy.
That's not true. That's not true though, because you could also have bad things happen in the world. You see, you can also see the good and bad in things. You understand? For example,
One second, I want to answer that. So please mute. Thank you. And David, what were you saying before?
No, all I'm saying is, if you see the stories of the Torah, they had a rough time, the Avot. It wasn't so easy for them. You see, Yaakov had the hardest life out of all of them. It was like a teaching experience. His son tricked him. Everything was all back and forth because he wasn't so straight. In his life, he had to come back and he straightened out. And then he was always Yashar. And even in the Torah, I don't see in the Torah anything about heaven and hell. In the five, maybe in the Nevi'im, it came back later. But in the Torah, I don't see anything mentioned about that Olam Haba, anything like that. Maybe I'm wrong, Rabbi. I don't see it. Maybe the Nevi'im spoke about it later when there was conditions. Even Rambam says the greatest way to do mitzvah, with no reward. So
So
that's it's I'm not saying it about everything.
Okay, good. So hold this thought. And Mo, you wanted to say something?
I mean, a lot of times I come to the conclusion that maybe I just have to make a strong impact in this world. After all, this is Hashem's creation. This is His project. This is what He wants us to make better. So if I can make a great impact in this world and there's nothing afterwards, then I made a great impact in Hashem's creation. Okay, and it's just a different spin on all this.
And Rabbi,
wait, Ariel, I want to hear Michael. One second, Ariel. Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, so I wanted to say me, Michael, yeah, or Michael.
Yeah, you.
Okay. So what I wanted to add, first of all, to answer the question, let's say if we all found out that this was fake, or for 1 second, Khalila, I would still prefer to have this type of way of life because it's good. You can see that it's good and it does positive things. You understand? Okay. So I'm willing to make to put my hands on the fire and say that I would preserve most of the things. Now, when we get to the concept of Pirkei Avot and talking about the rewards, right? How everything has become reward based, etc., etc. I think that this is a problem that we have in Judaism today. That everything was made to get an extra reward, and this is why we have that destroying the nation, because people are trying to be more machmir to get the extra reward.
Right.
So they're slaving away and destroying the nation because of this same fact.
I want to comment on that I heard once in a Arayat memorial service, the rabbi saying, this person who passed away was not a very wealthy person here, but he built for himself a mansion in the world to come with this mitzvot, and this is a concept that a lot of people have. I want before I go to other people, because I want to wrap up on time. I want to share this song with you. I'm sure that many of you know it, and maybe you even know the tune.
All the people.
It was written by a woman called Yoko Ono. Oh, see, they fixed it already, We thought for so long that John Lennon wrote it. Now we know it's Yoko. But great John couldn't give her the credit. He felt that he was afraid he's going to look bad. It's what a bummer. Okay. That's a song that a lot of people associate with atheism, right? With irreverence or heresy, right? Because look how it starts. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. So of course he says nothing to kill or die for, no religion too. that's a problem for a lot of people. But actually, what he's saying is, well, the question that I just asked: if you could imagine there's no heaven, there's no hell, would you still behave as religious people? Religious in the sense not of a religio, which is rigid law, but rather people who do good with one another. So that's a question that I'm going to put aside. There are a lot of questions that I raised today, more questions than answers. But we have to admit we don't really have an answer for that. But I want to circle back to the first thing that I mentioned. Those are the categories of when do we get upset or unnerved by evil? And we spoke about atrocities of a great scale, or something that happens randomly, when it happens to someone like us, when it happens to someone who's innocent and helpless, or it happened to us, to ourselves. And I came, sort of, this is my conclusion, okay? Based on conversations with people and readings, etc., and also listening to the news in different ways that things are described. There was one news item that really struck me, and it will strike a chord with those of you who were in the military during the war, during the Gulf War, and people, or maybe it was in Afghanistan, that people, we had soldiers wounded and killed, on a daily basis. People will come in. One reporter, I don't remember if it was NBC, or someone, a photographer, was hurt, and he was flown in from, after being treated in Germany, flown in with other injured veterans to Walter Reed, and a correspondent of NBC was standing there. And I think they were bringing stretchers, the injured from the plane, and the guy's there, and he says, "No, that's not him. That's not him." It was like maybe number 52, right? And I was listening to this news article, and I was thinking, before your friend from the NBC, number 52, there were 51 other injured soldiers, each one with a story, each one with a family, each one with a history. Why are we not talking about them, right? Why isn't there a coverage, of someone standing there and telling the personal story of each and every one of them? And the answer was, that was one of the moments I understood that when we ask, why do bad things happen to good people? We really ask, why is it that bad things happen to me? That's really the core of that question. We ask the question, why is it happening to me? Or how is it possible that, is it possible that will happen to me? I'm oversimplifying it. I'm sure that for a lot of people, it's not like that. I'm talking about the general presentation of that question, that rabbis and preachers talk about in different, in different assemblies and classes, etc. The question stems from this understanding of a system that we mentioned before. There's a system of reward and punishment that the God instilled in the world. If you do good, you'll be rewarded, and if you do evil, you'll be punished. And now, for a lot of people, following that system is a mode of self-preservation. This is how I survive. I follow orders, and then God bestows good upon me, right? So, as long as your life goes more or less without interruption, even if there are minor interruptions, you could attribute them to this or that. But then when something happens that shows us that the system doesn't work, there's a systemic failure, that's where we get upset, because we say, wait a second, if it happens to the innocent or the helpless, right? That means there's no justice. The system, it doesn't make sense. That person didn't do anything wrong. This young child, this young woman who was taken as a slave or a sex slave, they didn't do anything. Why are they suffering? When an atrocity happens on a great scale, then everybody's swept in that atrocity, and we say that means that this could happen here as well. When it's something random, like an accident, like a plane crash or a natural disaster, we say it could have been me. This is what we're thinking. Really, we don't want to admit that, but we think it could have been me on that plane. It could have been me, on that beach, or at the where the earthquake struck. Then obviously, if it happens to us, we ask the question, but also when it happens to people near us and to people who are like us. The reason that that NBC reporter was focusing on the other NBC reporter, the colleague, because to him, it was, if it happened to him, it could happen to me as well. How am I protected? I'm not protected. All we want protection from evil. And I think that also, Eduardo, in a second, and I think that also explains why we focus on the question, why do bad things happen to good people? That good things happen to good people, even if it's sometimes illogical, but we want it to sit with the system, because then it guarantees us, if we do good, that we will be successful. And that also explains when we ask for intervention, what we really ask God is, please intervene to make me feel comfortable, right? So even when we say Misha Berach, we pray for those who are closest to us. We pray for Cholei Amo Israel. Today, I think more and more people around the world are praying for the sick people all over the world. But usually, we're not really aware, unless you're really committed to social activism and to following trends of what is happening around the world. It's not something exceptional, Chinese or Chilean miners were trapped underground. You don't know what happens in those places. You don't care. As long as we have good life, I'm fine. So I think that is and that connects to what Susanna and what Yoni said, and Michael and Mo and other people said here, that really this question should lead us to think, what are we doing to make sure that bad things don't happen to good people? Eduardo, you wanted to comment something, and with this I think we'll conclude today. Yes. Eduardo? You are
Hi.
mute. Yeah.
Robert, just to share a short history. During the first year of my PhD, I was very unmotivated with the academic structure in Brazil, and I solved to share my perception about it with my PhD supervisor. During our discussion, I asked for him, Dr. Lorenzetti, I have a simple question for you. What is the life? And Eduardo, give me a second. And after 30 seconds, okay, let's go. Life can be comparable with go to cinema. And I said, what? He said me, when we go to cinema, we buy a ticket and we can choose the movie. These are the things that we control in our lives. We can assume that are all efforts during the life. However, we cannot control the end of the move. We can buy the ticket and we can choose the move, but we cannot control the end of this move, because this is the life.
Mm-hmm.
You can choose other movie to see, but you cannot change the histories.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we have a false perspective that we can control everything, but that is not true. Sometimes we choose a bad move. Sometimes the movie stuff are not the best, but we need to continue because this is the move of the life.
Right. So I'll add to that. We're stuck in the movie, but the analogy your professor made a couple of years ago wouldn't help so much today, because today you have interactive movies, or at least TV series, where the reactions of the viewers can change the end. And we are sort of like, we understand that we are in an interactive. In other words, we can't determine the end of the movie. We can't write it to script. We say, okay, I watch a movie, this is how I wanted it to end. But if I say I want it to end differently, it will end differently if I act. And that's also answer, I think, with that I want to comment and I know I accept what you're saying, Eduardo. I'm not rejecting it. I'm saying there's another layer to it, and end with the comment that Israel sent. And I think you're right. If we see it complacently and we say there's nothing we can do about that evil, we become part of that evil. And I think this is really the great power of the Torah that infuses us with hope and with responsibility to change the world. But
Rabbi,
we have to
sorry
take
to interrupt.
this selfish element from it. Yes, Michael, I just want to make sure that we start to fill out on time. If everybody's okay,
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to mention that when I was saying what I said before, I kept thinking kitov, kitov, and it was coming to me, and I'm thinking, like, who's saying kitov? And then I remembered Bereshit.
It's God, right?
So everything was like darkness, a haze. God made the light.
Yes.
And kitov, and if you read it, Bora et haor, and I forgot the mishpat exactly. Bevara kitov, and it's so innocent. You know how it's written? I see it so innocent, like a child almost.
Yeah.
I know it sounds weird.
Yeah.
Like he made the light in
so,
kitov, and then I see that as long as you have some clarity and you're able to see, if you see that something is good, follow it.
Yeah.
Follow the good, the right path.
Yeah, and I'll comment on that, and that's the last thing for today. I'll comment that the story of God says everything is kitov is in the world where there are no humans, or even after the creation of humans, they're still not interacting with the world. It's their first day. Right after this, chapter 2 tells us a completely different story, and everything becomes a disaster. But for Adam and Hava, or Adam and his wife, she's not called Hava yet, in the Garden of Eden, it's heaven still. Why? Because they live in the bliss of ignorance. They're like children who don't know. I mean, children who are being brought up in a normal family, right, which not everybody merits. But people who are being brought up in a normal family, their parents hide from them the evils of the world, even in the immediate family. And only when they grow up, they say, wow, I didn't know that the world is so messed up. Where is the heaven of my childhood? And they don't know that this heaven is only fake. But this is exactly the seed of the idea that Torah planted in our mind. If you compare it to other mythologies, it's an amazing thing. Heaven is a place that belongs to humans, not to the gods. And heaven is a place where everything is perfect. We think we lost paradise, but paradise never existed. And all we do, we are driven throughout our life to do good things to claim back this paradise. But what I want to argue, and we'll continue on Tuesday, Bezat Hashem, is that paradise is on earth. It's here where we can make the world into heaven. Anyway, let's continue here and do minha, because I want to be also kitov and sort of keep the times. I'm mentioning again because when I mentioned the beginning, not everybody was here. On Wednesday, we have a poetry night. If any of you writes poetry and would like to share with us, please let me know. And we'll work it out into the schedule. So we're going to say minha now. And also, Bezat Hashem, based on my exchange with Mo today, I think I came with an idea, maybe for next week, maybe this week, to have a session where if you are willing to come and tell your Jewish story, like the story of your life, something that we'd like other people to know and be inspired by, we'll do segments, each one 7-8 minutes, like This American Life. I know a lot of your personal stories, and I think that when you share with one another, they could be really inspiring. So let's go to Minha.
Marv.
To Arvit, sorry. We pray Minha already, I'm sorry.
David.
אדוני צבאות עמנו משגברנו הכל בסדר אדוני צבאות של המדע ברך אדוני יושיע המלך כהנו יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה
יגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה מה דיברה ואמריך מחותה
ויצמח פה קנה ויקרב משיחי